Welcome to Legacy Builders, Strategies for Building Successful Family Enterprises. Brought to you by Beacon Family Office at Asante Financial Management Limited. I'm your host, Jorge Gagnon, Senior Wealth Advisor. And on this show, we explore global ideas, concepts, and models that help family enterprises better navigate the complexities of family wealth. Today, we welcome Melanie Harty, partner at Grant Thornton LLP. With her extensive experience in tax planning, estate and succession planning, accounting, auditing, and financial management, Melanie guides business owners in building their family legacy and successfully transitioning their businesses to the next generation. As a CPA and certified family enterprise advisor, Melanie brings a wealth of experience and insight to her clients. Prior to joining Grant Thornton, Melanie gained valuable real-world experience working on her family farm, which allows her to provide clients with a unique and practical perspective for their businesses. My goal is to be the most curious person in today's conversation with Melanie Harty, where we explore her wealth of experience in guiding agricultural families through generational transitions and legacy planning. We'll focus on the significance of clear communication and aligned visions between generations, and thoughtful decision-making in ensuring the long-term success and harmony of these family businesses. Together, we'll uncover the importance of adaptability, realistic expectations, and inclusive discussions in preserving legacy for generations to come. Now, let's dive in. Welcome, Melanie. We're excited to have you here today to share your wealth of knowledge and experiences with us. Let's dive in, shall we?
You bet.
Melanie, imagine you're delivering the commencement speech to the graduating class of 2024, and you have the chance to inspire them with your story. How would you begin your speech to convey the incredible lessons and expertise that you've gained along your career?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the first statement I would make is don't let anyone tell you that you can't. When I look back on my upbringing, when I grew up, we didn't have a lot of money. We were in a small rural town, small school. There was a lot of assumptions made in small rural communities that you're never going to leave that community. You can't do this, you can't do that. If I'd have listened to them, I definitely wouldn't be where I'm at. So the biggest thing I always stress, and I told my kids growing up, is don't let anyone tell you that you can't.
Awesome. And so tell me, what is it? I grew up in a small town as well. I feel like there's a bit of that push-pull for people of leaving and staying. And so what is it about that small town attitude that you think is different or maybe distinct?
Well, I think being mindful, this was a few years ago.
Yeah.
So it was before all of the Google and the social media and all of those type of things. So you're kind of in your own little bubble. And it was an ag town. So the assumption is you're either going to stay on the farm or marry somebody who's staying on the farm. The idea of leaving was just not something that many people did. And if it did, it was huge news. Now, part of it is it's security. You're staying with the people you're staying close to family, and it can be a little bit scary to go outside of those boundaries. The other is just even the finance to do so, the education requirements to do so. We didn't have a lot of electives in our school, so sometimes that means upgrading and what have you. And even just understanding what is there out there, because besides the basics, a lawyer, doctor, accountant, secretary, there's a lot of other things out there in all of those different fields. But because we didn't have as much exposure, it's hard to even know, even if I wanted to leave, what would I do? What do I want to do?
Absolutely. And so a little bit of a cultural difference, even within smaller communities versus larger centers that are neighboring each other. And as I'm listening to you say that, there's also some great benefits to some of that. Just thinking about the specialization in a certain area. And so, it doesn't provide choice, but it also gives a lot of those educational opportunities for what is important to the community and presumably those families that are in that community. And so as you look around at some of those communities that we visit today, some of them are struggling because it's hard to keep their population up because those of us who've gravitated to the larger centers. How do you see that today in balancing that choice versus specialization as you engage with those families and communities?
Well, things have changed a bit today in that you can have those specializations, you can have those careers, and you can commute. You don't have to move to the cities. So I think that's a huge advantage. Post-COVID, I think people have realized that there's a lot of things that can be done remotely and you can be very productive. When I'm looking at some of the communities, the rural communities, the ones that I see thrive is based on still that same analogy. It is a strong leadership that are willing to step up, maybe think outside the box, and still have that don't let anybody tell you that you can't. Because there will be those that will try to discourage, that's too big of a risk. Maybe we shouldn't be doing that. How are we going to make that happen? And a lot of those questions come out of fear, but it is the individuals or the group of individuals in those small communities that instead of approaching those questions with fear, approach them with curiosity. And how can we do this? If we do this, what will happen? And those communities seem to be thriving because they have a very entrepreneurship view of those leaders that are creating those new projects, whether it's a new building, a new arena, a new business, bringing in business that isn't common in that community, taking a chance, taking a risk. Not that all those risks will work out, but at least they're taking the chance. And if they don't quit and they keep trying, eventually they will figure out something that works.
A few things that you said there, and I want to go back to that strong leadership, because leadership in a community is very much the same as leadership within a family enterprise. And so within these agricultural businesses that you work with today, how do you see some of that leadership where they've been able to be successful over those generations?
I think part of it is not being afraid to be the trailblazer. Maybe trying new, if you look at the farms, we're the most expensive farms. And if you look at their operations, they're ones that maybe are, trying the new technological advanced equipment, commodities, they're just trying, stepping outside and going, okay, what I'm doing, if I keep doing this for the next 10 years, I'm not going to be able to grow to where I want to grow. And maybe they're looking at their families saying, okay, right now the family feeds all of us, but when our kids are older, if we want to continue this farm to grow and become a legacy that can support more than one family, we have to do things different. Because if we keep doing it the same, it's safe, but we're not going to get to where we need to go. So you'll see them more progressive. You'll see them take on risks. Now they're calculated risks, but they're still willing to take that risk on because they know in order to achieve their vision, they are going to have to take some risks that may not be comfortable, but they're willing to do that to achieve that vision. So I think it's drive. It's even having that foresight, that vision in the first place. And they approach it as an entrepreneur, as a business person, and really you kind of have to step some of that emotion out of it because there is an emotional tie to that business, to the farm, to the land, legacy. But you have to set that to the side sometimes to say, okay, from a business perspective, if I was going to tell somebody else, a third party, what they needed to do, these are the steps that I would take.
Right. Now, going back to calculated risks and coming from an accounting perspective, how can people have the confidence in those risks? What would be kind of the steps to say this is a calculated risk and I've assessed the upside and the downside of that?
So the first, by definition, really just pros and cons, really thinking about it, not just jumping in and doing it. And the biggest thing to always give themselves grace or the permission to say, based on the facts that I know today, that I'm willing to do this because of this, this, and this. And I recognize that this can go wrong, this can go wrong, this can go wrong. But if these things happen, this is the safeguards I'll put in place. Maybe it's okay, we're going to try this for 3 years and then we're going to assess. And if at the end of 3 years, this blend of crop does not work, then we'll take a step back and we'll revisit it. And I think that's the biggest thing is also being fluid and being open to adjust. Every year, do that analysis. How's the report card? How did we do? Where can we tweak? Understanding that it's not going to just be, okay, here's our plan, now go. We have to revisit. Did it work? Are we getting closer to our goal? Are we moving farther away? If we're not achieving that goal, if we find that we're not moving closer to the goal, okay, what do we need to change? What do we need to tweak? And then move on. Or, as we know, with the never-ending changes in our tax laws, for example, now we have these different, like capital gains might be changing. There's the release of Bill C-208. There's a whole pile of things that might impact what that goal was. Maybe you have to ramp up and get there a little bit quicker, or maybe you have to do a full pivot, or maybe you have to start over depending on if that goal was transition, for example. So I think the biggest thing is always being open. You have to, just like, the big corporations, you have to step back and you have to visit your goals. You have to look at your strat plan. You have to look at your results, and you should be doing it more than just at the year end with the accountant, right? It should be something that you're revisiting monthly, quarterly, looking at your cash flows. You kind of have to step back so that the risk is you have a bit of control over that outcome.
Right. Now, agriculture is one of those businesses that there's many variables that are uncontrollable in that outcome. We could say commodity prices, we could say weather, we could say many different components to it that I think the farming community understands risk extremely well. And again, going back to those things that maybe aren't taught in the school, but taught on the farm, I think that is an extremely valuable lesson that is taught. Melanie, maybe thinking about generational transfer. We've got a generation that's now running the farm, and now they're bringing on that next generation. Maybe there's grandchildren on the way, more mouths to feed, and they're bringing family members into the farming operation. And as you mentioned, we have a lot of resources or information at our fingertips. And you've got this next generation that wants to try something, wants to make their mark, wants to expand the operations because they see their vision. How do you see those conversations and bringing in that next generation to be able to make their mark and maybe take the reins over time to be able to expand?
Well, it all depends on the situation. There isn't a set solution for anybody. We all know that families are different. Every family is different. There's different personalities. Every farm operation is different. The biggest key is communication. So when the next generation is saying, hey, like we want to take a shot at this, we want to become involved, how is that communication happening? Is the previous generation open to that communication? What is their vision? What is the vision of the next generation coming in? Do they align? And I think that is very key. Looking back on my personal experience, we farmed family farm for 16 years. And if there was one thing that we definitely could have done better that would have reduced some of the issues that happened along the way, it was having those conversations ahead of time and understanding, do we both have the same vision? Are our goals the same? Are our risk tolerances the same? When you have one where the goal is just, you know what, at this point in time, we just want to make sure we have enough to feed our mouths and whatnot. And we don't want to take risk. We just want to play it safe. But the other generation coming in is looking, going, no, we have to really think about this. We want this farm to survive over time. We need to make sure that we're big enough. We need to make sure that we have the equipment that keeps up with the most up-to-date practices. Back in the day, it was cultivate everything and then seed, go to where, and it was half and half crop rotation, saying, okay, we got to maximize this land. Here's a better way to do it. And you need both generations to have that openness if that's where you're going to go. Because if not, it's never going to be aligned and it's not going to be successful.
Right.
It's going to be frustration, right? Or you see some where the child says they want to come in. Are they coming in as a business owner or are they coming in as a hired hand and dad's still running the show, right? There's no teachable moments. We're not preparing for future time where dad steps back, whether because he wants to, he has to, or he's no longer here, right? If we want that farm to continue from generation to generation, there is a lot of business knowledge that has to be understood. You have to market your grain. So that is something that you can take courses on, but there's reality, there's connections, right? The theory, you can use the theory, but practical isn't always 100% of the theory. Who is that connection? Some of it is like instinct. Okay, you know what? These are the things that I think about before I sign or decide to sign. So there's a lot of details behind there that a lot of prep work needs to be done before the trigger is pulled. Have those conversations, communicate. And I find that's where sometimes it's the fear to communicate. It can be, you know what, as dad, it's like, I've got this plan, I've got it figured out. And in my head, I know when this transition is going to happen. But dad never talks to child. So the child is thinking, you know what? It doesn't look like there's any room for me on the farm. I don't want to approach if dad's not ready to talk to me about it. I don't want to approach as the entitled child, right? Coming in and saying, hey, when can I get in on this? So then that child makes their assumption that dad doesn't want a succession to happen. So maybe that child moves off the farm or decides to do something different. And then dad's upset because that ungrateful child never, wanted the farm. But at the end, if they would have both just communicated,
Right.
right, and dad saying, you know what, this will be yours at some point, then it would open the conversation. Or if the child came in and said, hey, dad, you know what, I've been working on the farm for a while. I really love this lifestyle. I want to be part of this. Is there an opportunity for me? Right? Just that one question on either side can open that communication.
Absolutely. Now, Melanie, I like how you said the roles, the hired hand versus management, because I think that is the key distinction at certain stages. And not to say that it can't evolve, that it can't be hired at the beginning and now it's evolved differently. And, it takes the family, just thinking about the seasonality of it. You talked about crop farming. Well, there's times of year that require more hands, and so sometimes the kids do come back from their careers off the farm to help. And then there's times that there's a decision made where that outside career is wrapping up, and I'd like to have a career on the farm. And so, how have you seen people transition from some of those what was a great circumstance and worked for everyone to life has changed, either the now generation getting older and needing more help, or the rising generation saying, hey, I've learned what I wanted to learn here and I'm ready? How have you seen those transition well?
It all depends. I think if you're looking from a general, the ones that were successful or ones that are open and flexible. Because with the prices of land, they're definitely not cheap. There's still debt. Where back in the day, a lot of times parents had their land paid for and were sitting there with enough time to build that nest egg before the next generation was ready. When you're looking at times now, there's many times where those parents because they didn't get the farmland until they were maybe in their 40s, right? Compared to being in their 20s way back when. So if you're looking, we might be talking Gen 2 to 3. So Gen 1 hung on to the farm, possibly in the eyes of Gen 2, it may be too long. So then Gen 2, when they should be thinking about retirement, are still trying to reduce their debt.
Right.
If you look at one of the stats we had now, they're saying the average age of farmers contemplating retirement, or the average age of contemplation of retirement from a business, is 57. Well, that's an interesting stat because at 57, there's a lot of farmers still in debt. So they aren't able to walk away and gift, hey, child, here, we're going to give you a step up so that you don't have to struggle as much. In a lot of situations, it can be health reasons. They just can't do that work anymore, even though from a finance, they have to. And so there has to be conversations on, okay, I hear you. I hear you want to be part of it, but how are we going to make this work when we still have, like, I need to retire at some point, right? You love your kids, but you need to make sure you're also taking care of yourself because I don't think the kids would love you living in their basement.
Right.
So you need to think about things like that. So we've had a lot of conversations of, okay, there is going to come a time where for that generation coming in, and sometimes even the current generation, off-farm income might be something that is going to have to happen to supplement that farm over a period of time until that debt is reduced enough that the debt is gone and we can give mom and dad a retirement pension, so to speak, so that they can live comfortably off the farm as they should because they've worked hard for that, and then move in. And then you have to step even back further to go, okay, what is that vision? Is the vision to have the next generation in? And if so, how is that going to work? Because people are living longer. So if we're going to be paying out first generation or supplementing their income off of the income off the farm, still paying debt, still operating the farm, and we have to work, how long does that generation that's working it now, how long do they have to do both? And when they are looking to retirement or their children are looking to come in, how is that going to work? How big do we have to be? Is that possible?
Right.
Because we know that there's only so much land. And with the prices the way they are, you can have a lot of land for sale, but if you can't come up with enough money or pay for it, right, it's not going to happen. So, really having those realistic conversations. And in some situations, it's a question of, you know what? I love that you want to come in right now, but until this and this and this are either paid off or this and this happens, there's no way this farm can pay for all of us to be here. And so then you have to start going through, okay, if we really want to make this happen, what are the other options? What can we do? Is there different farming practices? Is there a way to really maximize this property? And those can be really hard conversations, right? Because it's easy to say, this is what I want. And if you want it hard enough, there's probably ways to do it, but are you willing to do what it takes in order to get there? And I think that's the biggest thing because we know farming is a full-time job. And then if you have to work off the farm, that's another full-time job. What are the sacrifices that are going to happen? What is the sacrifices to your personal life, your family, stress, all of that kind of stuff? And are you willing to make those sacrifices for that farm?
Right.
Having those hard conversations ahead of time is a lot easier than getting 5 years down the road and then saying, oh, well, this isn't working. And then you have to unwind it all. And we've had those situations as well, where we have had the family come to us after they had just said, okay, let's do this. They jump in and do it. And then we come in part way through and we're trying to mitigate, the conflicts that have happened, the hard feelings, the burnout, the financial stress, all of that. It's a lot harder. Not to say that it can't be done, but it's a lot more work and a lot harder and usually a lot more cost.
Right.
To try to fix the situation and resolve some of those issues than if we just have those hard conversations right off the get-go. And so when everybody comes in, everybody comes in knowing what they know today. We can't control everything, right? We can't control what's going to happen 5 years from now, but knowing what they know today, they can say, you know what? we're making the best decisions that we can today. And this is what we're willing to do.
Right. I want to go back to the parents living in the basement because mom and dad living on the farm, oftentimes the farm operation surrounds the house. And so retiring in place is very difficult in farming families. And this becomes a conversation that isn't necessarily a business decision. Now we've got family members who are not involved in the business who join the conversation of what's mom and dad's retirement going to look like. How do those complexities fit into how this all works as the enterprise is bigger than just the business?
That's a great question. And I think the biggest thing is family, right? It's a family business. And even we approach it for estate planning, it's the same thing. Yes, we have a farm, but we have more than the child that's farming. How are we going to make this fair for everybody? And fair is not equal, but how do we make this fair? And it's stepping back to being holistic. And that's kind of where you look and say, okay, if you look at family enterprise, the operations are one thing, right? But you have to look at everything else. So let's go the road of mom and dad retiring. Are they going to stay on the farm or are they going to move to town? Can they stay on the farm, or for medical reasons, do they need to be in town where they're closer to all the amenities and doctors and whatnot? If that's the case, how is that going to work? And so, as a non farming child, my question would be, okay, well, if you're taking over the farm and mom and dad have put their heart and soul into this farm, how are they going to have enough? Because maybe myself, I've been off the farm, I've done my own thing. I don't feel it's right that I have to pay for mom and dad to move to town.
Right.
Right. So, from my perspective, if I'm a non farming child, I'm going to want to know that mom and dad are okay. And so, having that plan, having that conversation is great. Let's cash flow this, right? How is the farm going to make sure that mom and dad are okay? And so, same thing, open communication. And there should be a full family communication. Everybody should know, or that I shouldn't say, in order for it to be successful, it is a great idea to include all family members in some of these conversations. They don't have to know the ins and outs of what's going on the farm. They don't have to know the income, but they do. It is important for them to understand the greater plan,
Right.
or they're going to make up the story themselves. And so that they understand, you know what, little Joey is going to get the farm, and he is not given the farm. He will be paying for it over time. And that payment over time is what's going to supplement us. And we're going to be able to move to town. And this is the cash flow we're going to have. Then everybody understands and go one step further. And if we shall pass away before, that debt has been paid off, this is the plans, so that everybody understands the why and you have the communication while mom and dad are still have the capacity, or they're on this earth, to be able to answer those questions. And I think that's key, is to be transparent in some of this planning.
Absolutely. Melanie, I want to go back to, are you willing to do what it takes? Because as you mentioned, this land is generating a lot of wealth. And the next generation sees the dollar signs that is tied up in this land. And they might say, I'm not willing to do what it takes. How have you seen that be successful? Because I think oftentimes people see that as a failure. And that vision of it will be transitioned. How have you seen different ways that it allows that generation who doesn't want to take over operations, mom and dad, to still be proud of what they've done?
That's a good question. There's many ways that we've had that. We step back with the first question. I always ask, what does legacy mean to you? Because legacy can mean different things to different people, and even mom and dad's view of the land can be different. So for some, the legacy of the land is operating the farm and seeing it with that operations with their name on there, right? It's been in the family for 100 years. That's what our legacy is. But for some, legacy can just be the cash flow that it generates. So we do have many situations where the kids are just, they're in their 40s, they're in their 50s, and they're like, you know what? I am so close to retirement. I don't want to do that. I am so far removed. I don't even know where I'd start. Um, that's great for mom and dad. Maybe when I was in my 20s, that was something I want to do, but now we're established. The conversation then flows to, okay, what next? Well, there's lots of options. That farm operation can turn into an investment operation and rent that land out. Still generates X amount. And so mom and dad can be taken care of in retirement through that. And then conversations happen. What is the kids' view of this legacy? Is that something they want to do going forward? Do they see the value in renting that land? Because the biggest thing to remember is there's lots of dollar signs, but it's in the land. So they're asset rich and usually cash poor. And so that is something that a lot of outside, whether it's outside family members or people not 100% involved in the operation, don't understand that it's not like the money is flowing in like crazy. That is based on the fact that the supply and demand, the demand of the land has raised that value of the land. But in order to capitalize on that, you have to sell the land and then figure out after tax, what do you really have left? And with that cash amount, what can you invest in to provide that income? And so we've had a lot of conversations where we compare, okay, if you sold the land today, after tax, what can you invest in and get a return on? And what would that be going forward? If you keep the land, what can you generate from land rent? Because you'll always have that asset. So
Right.
at any point you can sell it, right? But what can you generate? And so we'll have that conversation. Usually mom and dad understand and they're like, no, this is the easiest investment. We're going to keep the land. But it's when it goes to the next generation, when mom and dad are maybe in their 80s and they're talking about simplifying estate. That's when we start talking to the families. And then we go back and forth because sometimes mom and dad are trying to do whatever they can. It's again communication. So mom and dad see this land as the best investment ever. But maybe you have 3 kids. Do you want 3 kids owning that land together? Do they see that as the best investment ever? Because sometimes that's not always the case. You might have one that wants to keep the land, 2 that want to sell. Now you've created a conflict with the kids. How is that going to be resolved? So then we go down those conversations of saying, okay, we need to have a family meeting. Let's ask each of the kids. And a lot of times in these meetings, we will sit down with them separately because they might not be comfortable with mom and dad in the room. And so they know it's confidential. We're going to share the outcomes that come from the meeting, but we're not sharing who has said what. But then we can kind of come back with a poll of saying, you know what? It's unanimous X, or there's a little bit of division here. They can see the pros and cons to both sides. But at the end of the day, probably when you're to pass, it's going to wind up being a conflict. So let's talk about this now. And some of those cases, mom and dad are like, you know what? We've been hanging on because we thought this is what the kids want. But if the kids aren't interested, we're in our 80s now, taxes aren't likely going to go down, especially with some of the things happening. Maybe we should look at triggering it now. Or, hey, the renter came to us. We can either sell it for X now, or we're going to have to, are the kids wanting to keep negotiating these rents? So then they start looking, going back to the legacy. What is the purpose of the legacy? Is it the land or is it the wealth? And if it's the wealth, we've had some families say, you know what? Let's trigger it now. After tax, we'll take what we need to live off of. We'll divide it between the other 3 and let them enjoy that wealth now. Maybe it's, allowing them to retire sooner, helping the grandkids go through university, whatever the case may be. But a lot of times the families will say, as the parents or the grandparents, I want to see them enjoy it now. If that's the case, then let's just do that now and solve the pain later when the kids have to try to negotiate this by themselves.
Absolutely. So many, so many nuggets there for people to think about. And I think going back to what you started with is don't tell anyone that you can't, because there's so many things that we talked about where really having an experienced advisor such as yourself who've navigated so many of these situations, uh, there isn't a one size fits all, and there's so much that can be tailored to the individuals within the family and ensure that as you said, those conflicts don't come up later. It's better to deal with it now. Melanie, as we near the end of our conversation, there are a few questions that I ask each guest before we wrap up. Are you ready for the tough ones?
You bet. Bring it on.
Awesome. First one, what is one key strategy that you believe is essential for building a successful family enterprise?
I think the biggest thing on that is there isn't one key plan. If families are unique, and we'd all be kidding ourselves if we said, okay, here's this plan on paper, it can apply to every situation. So instead, I would say the key practice is to have open, clear, honest communication and trust.
Awesome. That's great. And yeah, if it was one size fits all, then life would be easy. And it's not. The second, what is the most common challenge that you see family enterprises encountering when it comes to wealth transition and generational continuity?
I would say the one common challenge that I see on all families, and it's setting the time to the side to work on this and not be distracted, like be committed to the process, because we get busy and the farm's always busy. We know it's busy. And then when it's not busy, there's that time to recharge. You get Christmas and then you're starting to think about seeding or you go into calving. You have to be very purposeful in setting that time to the side, book a meeting from a meeting, have an agenda, and ensure that it is a priority.
Absolutely. And in your experience, what would be the top three qualities that successful family enterprise leaders possess?
The top three first is be a great listener. We're there to listen. We're not there to talk to. We need to listen. The other thing is being willing to work with others as a multidisciplinary team, because we all have our strengths, but we need to recognize that we need to stay in our lane. I'm not a tax specialist. I will bring a tax specialist in. I am not an investment advisor. I will bring that investment advisor in. And the third is to always be aware of your biases when you come into those meetings. We all have biases. We all come with baggage from our own family dynamics, and we need to put that to the side and recognize that if we see that's coming in.
Awesome. I love that. And there's so much that we covered today, and I'd like to highlight for our listeners both where they could engage in more conversations that you're having, or more information on some of the topics maybe that you've been reading or enjoying.
Yeah, so there is a lot of information out there that can help you understand what a family enterprise advisor does. You can definitely link to our website for sure. We have links with regards to family enterprise advisory. But I would say the biggest thing, even just call and, book time and ask the questions. Because again, specific to your own families, a generic answer might not give a great detail of how it can help that specific scenario.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ensure that we covered everything today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience that maybe we didn't get a chance to touch on?
I think the biggest thing that I want to share, and it's a statistic that was actually, we pulled one of our speaking engagements, and it's fairly in line with the Alberta website. only 25% of Alberta farm operators have a formal succession plan. So if you think about the age of farms or the original farm owner operator, and you think about the amount of farms in Alberta, that is quite low. When we're talking about the wealth, we need to really ensure that that's a priority in order to protect that legacy built, whether it's having it continue on or creating the wealth and turning it into cash, but want to make sure that that legacy stays within the family, because without a plan, it can end up going in tax and legal fees, and that legacy can be gone.
Awesome. That's a staggering statistic. That is unreal to think only 25%. And we often hear quoted that only 50% of Canadians have a will. And yes, that's a great first step, but a succession plan is distinctly different. And I think that there's a lot of work for us to do in that space. So thank you for bringing that one up. That's something to think about for advisors and our listeners who are thinking about what is their succession plan. Melanie, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to share all these stories, your expertise, experiences. There's so much that we touched on today, and I think that it'll be extremely valuable for our listeners. And I know that it was extremely valuable for myself. So thank you for your contribution.
Thank you for having me.
As we wrap up this episode, we invite you to reflect on the wealth of insights Melanie has shared about navigating family business dynamic and her expertise shedding light on the unique challenges and opportunities faced by families as they strive to build a lasting legacy. Whether you are part of a family business or provide consulting to them, Melanie's emphasis on open communication, calculated risk-taking, and proactive planning highlights the key factors in ensuring the long-term success and legacy of family enterprises. Throughout our discussion, Melanie talked about the importance of open communication and flexibility when navigating the complexities of family businesses. She emphasized aligning the visions of different generations and ensuring all family members feel included in decision-making. Melanie's insights highlight the need for families to approach these conversations with curiosity and realism, seeking mutually beneficial outcomes that honor past generations while empowering the future ones. Ultimately, our conversation showcases the value of experienced guidance and open dialogue in navigating family dynamics and securing a lasting legacy. For those seeking additional guidance on navigating the complexities of tax planning, estate and succession planning, and accounting, Melanie is always eager to connect directly. You can reach out to her via the Grant Thornton LLP website, and we've included her contact information together with additional resources in the show notes to support you on your family journey. Also, a word from Grant Thornton LLP. The information included and examples contained within this podcast are for information purposes only and are not intended to be relied upon to be a complete description of any specific accounting or tax issue or the opinion of Grant Thornton LLP. You should consult your Grant Thornton LLP advisor to obtain additional details to discuss whether the information in this podcast applies to your specific situation or to obtain specific advice. Thank you for joining me, Corey Gagnon, your host of Legacy Builders Podcast. It's my personal passion to explore with you these topics related to family wealth. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your preferred podcast platform. And don't forget to share this episode with family, friends, and colleagues who you care about. If you'd like to help support this show, you can do so by leaving a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything shared on today's episode, or have topics you'd like us to dive deeper into in future episodes, please let us know by emailing beaconfamilyoffice@asante.com. That's beaconfamilyoffice@assante.com. Legacy Builders, Strategies for Building Successful Family Enterprises is brought to you by Beacon Family Office at Asante. Are you worried about losing what you've created and seeking ways to transition your wealth across generations? Beacon Family Office at Asante supports our clients transition their wealth while maintaining relationships. If you'd like to access more content we've created, you can visit us at beaconfamilyoffice.com or for more details on our services and book an initial call. Thanks again for listening, and until next episode, stay intentional about building your legacy. This program was prepared by Corey Gagnon, who is a senior wealth advisor with Beacon Family Office at Asante Financial Management Limited. This is not an official program of Asante Financial Management, and the statements and opinions expressed during this podcast are not necessarily those of Asante Financial Management. This show is intended for general information only and may not apply to all listeners or investors. Please obtain professional financial advice or contact us at beaconfamilyoffice@asante.com or visit beaconfamilyoffice.com to discuss your particular circumstances prior to acting on the information presented.